I am Emma Hayes, 34, and I built a multi-million-dollar tech company from scratch in Boston. Growing up, I always felt second best to my sister Julie. My parents made it clear she was their priority, but I never imagined how far their favoritism would go until that certified letter arrived. The envelope contained more than just words. It was the ultimate betrayal that would eventually spiral into a legal battle I never saw coming. Sometimes the people who should love you unconditionally become the ones trying to take everything you built. Before I dive into how my own parents tried to take everything I worked for, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by those who should love you most. I grew up in a quiet middle-class neighborhood in Hartford, Connecticut. Our house was nothing special, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with faded blue shutters and a small backyard where Dad attempted to grow tomatoes every summer. My parents, Martha and Richard Hayes, were ordinary people. Mom worked as a receptionist at a dental office, and Dad was a sales manager at a local furniture store. We were comfortable, but never wealthy. From my earliest memories, I realized my place in the family hierarchy. Julie, my sister 5 years younger than me, was the golden child, the favorite, the special one. I was an afterthought. When Julie started school, Mom and Dad bought her an entirely new wardrobe. Pretty dresses with matching hair accessories, shiny new shoes, and a pink backpack with her name embroidered on it. For my first day of kindergarten, I got hand-me-downs from our cousin Melissa. I still remember the faded purple jumper with a small tear that Mom had hastily sewn up the night before. "We need to be practical, Emma," Mom would say whenever I asked why Julie got new things. Besides, Julie is more particular about her clothes. The pattern continued throughout our childhood. When I made the honor roll in 6th grade, Dad nodded and said, "Good job," before returning to his newspaper. When Julie brought home a B+ in math the following year, they took her out for ice cream to celebrate her academic breakthrough. I played softball in middle school and made it to the regional championships. Neither of my parents attended a single game that season, claiming they were too busy with work. But they never missed one of Julie's ballet recitals, even when Dad had to reschedule important client meetings. Christmas and birthdays were perhaps the most obvious displays of their favoritism. On my 10th birthday, I received a $20 gift card to the local bookstore and a cake Mom had quickly picked up from the grocery store. For Julie's 10th birthday, they threw her a princess-themed party with professional decorations, hired a face painter, and gave her the latest gaming console she'd been begging for. I pretended not to care, but I locked myself in the bathroom and cried that night. The only person who ever made me feel valued was my grandmother Grace. Mom's mother lived about 30 minutes away in a small cottage filled with antique furniture and the smell of fresh baked cookies. I spent as many weekends there as my parents would allow, which was often since it meant one less child to worry about. Grandma Grace was different. She noticed me. She listened. She celebrated my achievements, no matter how small. "You've got a sharp mind, Emma," she would tell me while we played cards at her kitchen table. And determination. Those two things will take you far in life if you use them right. Unlike my parents, Grandma Grace had built something of her own. She had owned a small but successful bakery in town until she retired. She taught me about business, about self-reliance, and about standing up for myself. "Never wait for someone to give you permission to succeed," she told me once. Some people will never want to see you shine because your light makes them face their own darkness. I didn't understand then that she was talking about my mother. By high school, I had accepted my position in the family and channeled all my energy into creating my own path. I joined every business-related club, maintained a perfect GPA, and worked part-time at the local tech repair shop. My goal was clear: earn a scholarship to a good business school and never look back. And I did it. I graduated valedictorian and received a partial scholarship to Boston University's business program. My parents attended my graduation but left early to take Julie to her friend's sweet 16 party. I pretended not to notice. During my sophomore year of college, Grandma Grace passed away unexpectedly from a stroke. I was devastated. She was the one person who had always believed in me, and suddenly she was gone. At the funeral, Mom seemed more concerned with the arrangements than with grieving, while Julie cried dramatically in the front row, despite having visited Grandma Grace only a handful of times in the past few years. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Grandma's lawyer. She had left me $15,000 and her collection of antique jewelry. She was very specific that these items were to go to you and you alone, the lawyer explained. When my parents found out, they were furious. I'm her daughter. I should have received something. Mom snapped when I called to tell her about the inheritance. You could at least share some of it with Julie, Dad added. She's having a hard time processing your grandmother's death. I refused. For once, someone had chosen me first, and I wasn't going to give that up, even in death. During those college years, I distanced myself from my family. I called on holidays and visited once a semester, but otherwise I built my own life in Boston. I made friends who appreciated me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. My roommate Alyssa became the sister I wished I'd had. We stayed up late talking about our dreams and supported each other through exam stress and breakups. I also met Nathan during my junior year. He was studying computer science and introduced me to the world of tech startups. For the first time, I had people in my life who saw potential in me, who encouraged my ambitions rather than dismissing them. It was like finally being able to breathe after years of having someone stand on my chest. After graduation, I took a job at a small tech company in downtown Boston. The pay was modest, barely enough to afford the tiny studio apartment I rented in a less than desirable neighborhood. My parents seemed pleased I had settled into a stable job, though they never asked for details about what I actually did. At least you can pay your bills, Mom said during one of our infrequent phone calls. That's all most people can hope for. But I wanted more than just paying bills. I had ideas. Big ones. During my time working at the tech company, I identified a gap in the market for specialized software that could help small businesses manage their customer relationships without the expense of enterprise-level systems. I spent nights and weekends developing a prototype, using the programming skills Nathan had taught me during college. I decided to take a risk and use Grandma Grace's inheritance as seed money. The $15,000 wasn't much in the business world, but it was enough to register my company, Secure Connect, and build out the first version of my platform. Those early days were brutal. I worked my day job from 9 to 5, came home to my studio apartment, ate whatever was quick and cheap, and then coded until 2 or 3 in the morning. I survived on coffee and determination. My social life dwindled to almost nothing. Alyssa would occasionally drag me out for dinner, concerned that I was working myself to death. Nathan and I had broken up amicably after graduation when he moved to Seattle for a job with a major tech company, but we remained friends, and he provided technical advice when I got stuck. The first launch of my software was a disaster. The system crashed within hours, and the few customers who had taken a chance on me were furious. I spent a weekend fixing bugs, not sleeping for nearly 48 hours straight. I cried on my bathroom floor at 4 in the morning, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. Maybe Mom and Dad were right, I whispered to myself in the darkness. Maybe I'm not special. Maybe I should just be content with an ordinary life. But then I remembered Grandma Grace's words about determination. I got up off the floor, washed my face, and went back to work. The turning point came when I attended a local tech networking event and met Diane Reynolds, a veteran in the industry who had sold her first company for millions. Something about my pitch caught her attention, and she agreed to meet for coffee. Your product has potential, she told me bluntly. But your business model needs work. You're thinking too small. Diane became my mentor, helping me refine my strategy and introducing me to potential clients. With her guidance, I secured my first major client, a regional chain of 30 fitness centers that needed exactly what my software offered. That first big check allowed me to quit my day job and focus entirely on Secure Connect. I rented a small office space and hired 2 employees, both recent graduates with technical skills and enthusiasm. We worked long hours, but celebrated every small victory with cheap champagne and takeout food. As the business grew, I tried once again to connect with my family. I called more frequently, sent gifts for birthdays and holidays, and even flew home for Thanksgiving. I wanted them to see that I was building something meaningful, that I was succeeding on my own terms. But my parents remained unimpressed. When I tried to explain my business over Thanksgiving dinner, Dad interrupted. "That internet stuff is just a phase," he said, waving his fork dismissively. "These startups come and go. You should consider getting a real job with a pension before you waste too many years." Julie, who had dropped out of college and was working part-time at a clothing store while finding herself, smirked across the table. "Not everyone wants to be a workaholic with no personal life, Emma," she said sweetly. I stopped trying to share my professional life with them after that. When Julie got engaged to Brian, a real estate agent she had known for only 6 months, my parents threw an elaborate engagement party and called me daily with updates about wedding plans. The wedding itself was lavish, with my parents spending money I never knew they had on a country club venue, top-shelf open bar, and designer dress for the bride. At the reception, I sat at a table with distant cousins while Julie and Brian's friends occupied the tables closest to the wedding party. Mom stopped by briefly to ask if I was enjoying myself, then rushed off to help Julie bustle her dress for the first dance. 1 month after Julie's wedding, Secure Connect won a prestigious industry award for innovation. The recognition led to a feature in a national tech magazine, which mentioned my age and background. Suddenly, my phone was ringing with calls from my parents. "We saw your picture in that magazine," Mom said, an unusual note of excitement in her voice. Everyone at my office was so impressed. I told them all about how we encouraged your interest in computers from an early age. It was a complete fabrication, but I let it slide. Over the next few months, my parents showed more interest in my life than they had in years. They called regularly and even suggested visiting me in Boston. During these conversations, they would casually mention financial struggles. Dad's commission structure had changed at work. The roof needed replacing. Julie and Brian were having trouble qualifying for a mortgage on their dream home. The hints were obvious, but I pretended not to notice. Part of me was hurt that their renewed interest coincided with my financial success. Another part, a small, wounded child part, was still desperate for their approval and wondered if I should help them despite everything. Instead, I channeled my energy into growing my company and building my own life. I bought a beautiful condo in a historic brownstone, my first real home that felt like mine. I hosted a housewarming party with friends who had supported me through the lean years. Neither of my parents attended, claiming the drive was too long, though they had managed to visit Boston twice that year for shopping trips with Julie. As I arranged my grandmother's antique clock on my new mantelpiece, I realized something important. I had built this life without their support or approval. And it was a good life, one that made me proud. Maybe that was enough. My 34th birthday fell on a perfect autumn Saturday. I had planned a day of simple pleasures. A morning run along the Charles River, brunch with Alyssa and a few close friends, and dinner at my favorite restaurant. The weather cooperated with clear skies and that crisp October air that makes New England famous. I wasn't expecting gifts, so when Alyssa handed me a small, beautifully wrapped package, I was touched. "It's nothing fancy," she said as I carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small pendant. "Read the inscription," she urged. In tiny letters it said, "She believed she could, so she did." I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful gift my mother had never given me. When I returned home that evening, pleasantly tired and slightly wine-flushed, I noticed a certified letter in my mail pile. The return address was from Connecticut, my parents' address. My first thought was that perhaps they had remembered my birthday after all. I signed for it, expecting a card. Inside was a single page of formal stationery, my mother's preferred paper for important communications. I still remember every word. "Dear Emma, your father and I have decided to update our will. After careful consideration, we've determined that everything will go to Julie. She has a growing family to support and, frankly, needs the assistance more than you do. You've been fortunate in your business ventures, though we both know luck and help from others played significant roles in whatever success you've achieved. We're informing you now to avoid any unpleasantness later. There's no need to respond to this letter. Regards, Martha Hayes. No, happy birthday. No love, Mom. Just regards, Martha Hayes, as if I were a business acquaintance rather than her daughter. I read the letter 3 times, unable to process what I was seeing. My hands shook so badly that the paper made a rattling sound in the quiet of my apartment. My chest felt tight, and I had to sit down as a wave of dizziness washed over me. The clinical tone, the dismissal of my hard work as luck. The formal notification that I was, officially and legally, worth less than my sister in their eyes. It was like being stabbed and having the knife twisted slowly. I called Alyssa immediately, my voice breaking as I tried to explain what had happened. They can do whatever they want with their money, I told her through tears. But to send this letter, to say those things about my success being luck, who does that to their child? Toxic people who don't deserve you, Alyssa replied firmly. Honey, I know they're your parents, but this is emotional abuse, plain and simple. I didn't respond to the letter. What was there to say? They had made their decision, and the line about no need to respond made it clear they weren't interested in my feelings on the matter. Instead, I threw myself into work with renewed intensity. If they thought my success was luck, I would build something so undeniably impressive that no one could attribute it to good fortune. I worked longer hours, pursued bigger clients, and pushed my team to innovate faster. About 3 weeks after receiving the letter, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from a distant cousin mentioning my father's health problems. It was the first I'd heard of any issues. Despite everything, I felt a stab of concern. I considered calling, but remembered the cold regards at the end of my mother's letter and decided against it. A few days later, I ran into Barbara, my mother's friend from college who had moved to Boston years ago. We occasionally crossed paths at the farmer's market on Sundays. Emma, darling, how are you? I was so sorry to hear about your father's heart condition. Will you be coming to the will reading next week? Martha mentioned they've updated everything recently. I stood there, grocery bag in hand, completely blindsided. Not only had no one told me about Dad's heart condition, but there was apparently a formal will reading scheduled that I knew nothing about. I haven't been invited, I said simply. Barbara's expression shifted from friendly to uncomfortable. Oh, I'm sure it's just an oversight. You know how scattered your mother can be with these things. We both knew it wasn't an oversight. The week of the will reading, I found myself unable to sleep, plagued by a mixture of hurt, anger, and confusion. Had I truly been such a disappointment as a daughter that they would exclude me from a family legal proceeding? Was I that easily erased? I finally broke down and called the family home, something I rarely did anymore. Mom answered on the 4th ring. Hayes residence, she said formally. Mom, it's Emma. I heard about Dad's health issues and the will reading. Why didn't anyone tell me? There was a long pause. We didn't want to burden you with our problems. You're always so busy with your little company. Little company? I repeated incredulously. Mom, I employ 27 people now, and I'm never too busy for important family matters. Well, the reading is just a formality, she replied dismissively. As I explained in my letter, everything has been decided. There's really no reason for you to attend. Before I could respond, she added, I need to go now. Julie and Brian are coming over for dinner. And hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, feeling as if I'd been slapped. The finality of it stunned me. This wasn't just about money or property. This was my mother telling me, in no uncertain terms, that I was not considered family anymore. That night, I took a long bath, opened a bottle of expensive wine, and allowed myself to cry until I had no tears left. Then, I did what I had always done when faced with rejection from my family. I made a plan to move forward without them. I called my financial advisor the next day and updated my own will, removing my parents and Julie as potential beneficiaries. I designated several charities and set up a scholarship fund for young women in business. If my family didn't want me, I would create my own legacy. 3 months after the will reading I wasn't invited to, I received a text message from a cousin. Uncle Richard passed last night. Funeral Saturday at First Methodist. Not a call from my mother. Not even a direct message. News of my father's death came through a secondhand text, as if I were a distant relative rather than his firstborn child. Grief is complicated when you lose someone who rejected you. Part of me mourned the father I had once adored as a little girl, the man who had taught me to ride a bike and built me a treehouse. Another part felt the fresh sting of his final rejection, the knowledge that he had died without trying to reconcile. I wasn't even sure if I should attend the funeral. Would my presence be seen as disrespectful? Would it cause a scene that would dishonor his memory? In the end, I decided to go. Whatever had happened between us, he was my father, and I needed that closure. The church was filled with familiar faces when I arrived. Former neighbors, family friends, relatives I hadn't seen in years. I slipped into a pew near the back, not wanting to intrude on the family seating. A few people nodded in recognition, but most avoided eye contact, clearly aware of the family rift. During the service, I watched my mother and Julie sitting in the front row. Mom sat rigidly, tissues clutched in her hand, but her eyes dry. Julie sobbed dramatically, leaning against Brian for support. I wondered if her grief was genuine or another performance designed to center attention on herself. Immediately, I felt guilty for the thought. Whatever our issues, losing a parent was painful for anyone. At the reception afterward, I kept to myself, accepting condolences from those brave enough to approach me. I overheard snippets of conversations about the will, about how generous my father had been to Julie, about the family home that would soon belong to her and Brian. I was preparing to leave when Brian cornered me by the coat rack. "I hope you're not here thinking you can contest anything," he said in a low voice. "The will is ironclad." Richard made his wishes very clear. I was stunned by his hostility at a funeral, of all places. "I came to say goodbye to my father," I replied quietly. "Nothing more."
He scoffed. "Right."
The prodigal daughter returns. "Just remember, you chose your path a long time ago." I left without saying goodbye to my mother or Julie. The drive back to Boston was a blur of tears and talk radio turned up loud to drown out my thoughts. Back at work the following Monday, I threw myself into distraction. By coincidence, a major opportunity had emerged. North Star Tech, one of the largest software companies in the country, had expressed interest in acquiring Secure Connect. Their initial approach had come weeks earlier, but I had put off serious discussions during my father's illness. Now, I welcomed the all-consuming nature of acquisition talks. Every day brought meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, and North Star executives. We negotiated terms, valuation, and the future role I might play in the merged company. The process was exhausting but exhilarating, giving me purpose during a time of emotional turmoil. After 2 months of intense negotiations, we reached an agreement. North Star would acquire Secure Connect for $4.7 million. My team would be integrated into their organization with guaranteed positions for at least 2 years. And I would walk away with enough money to never work again, if I chose not to. The night after signing the final papers, I sat alone in my condo, a glass of champagne in hand. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt oddly hollow. There was no one from my family to call with the news. No one who had been there from the beginning to celebrate this milestone with me. "To you, Grandma Grace," I whispered, raising my glass to the antique clock on my mantel. "You believed in me when no one else did." With my newfound financial freedom, I decided to make some changes. I bought a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood, something with space for a home office and a garden that Grandma Grace would have loved. I hired a designer to help furnish it, creating the warm, welcoming home I had always dreamed of. A month after moving in, I was featured in Boston Business Magazine in an article about successful tech entrepreneurs. The piece mentioned my humble beginnings and the company I had built from scratch. There was no mention of family support because there had been none to mention. 2 days after the magazine hit newsstands, a package arrived at my door with no return address. Inside was a collection of my childhood photos, school certificates, and a few small items I had left behind in Connecticut. There was no note, but I recognized my mother's handwriting on the address label. I interpreted this delivery as my mother's way of saying goodbye, of severing the final threads that connected us. She was returning my past to me, washing her hands of any responsibility for the person I had become. That night, I booked a 3-week trip to Europe. I needed distance, perspective, and time to process both my grief and my success. As the plane took off from Boston Logan Airport, I felt a weight lifting. For the first time in my life, I was completely free of expectations, obligations, and the desperate need for approval that had driven me for so long. The European trip was exactly what I needed. 3 weeks of museums, historic sites, and quiet cafes where no one knew my name or my story. I walked for miles through ancient cities, took cooking classes in Tuscany, and spent peaceful afternoons reading in Parisian parks. By the time I returned to Boston, I felt renewed, ready to start the next chapter of my life. My new home welcomed me back with its spacious rooms and morning light streaming through tall windows. I spent Sunday unpacking and settling back into my routine, planning my week, and enjoying the simple pleasure of sleeping in my own bed again. The doorbell rang around 11:30 that morning. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I assumed it might be a neighbor or perhaps a package delivery. When I opened the door, I froze in shock. My mother stood on my doorstep, alongside Julie and Brian. They looked oddly out of place against the backdrop of my elegant new home, like characters who had wandered into the wrong movie set. "Emma," Mom said stiffly. "May we come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside, more out of ingrained politeness than actual desire to have them in my home. They followed me into the living room, their eyes darting around, taking in the high ceilings, designer furniture, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "This is quite a place," Brian whistled, his tone somewhere between impressed and resentful. "Business must be good." "Would anyone like coffee?" I offered, falling back on hostess manners to mask my discomfort. "No thank you, dear," Mom replied, perching on the edge of my sofa, as if afraid to fully commit to sitting. "We can't stay long." Julie remained standing, arms crossed over her chest, her expression sour. I noticed she looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. Brian placed a possessive hand on her shoulder. An awkward silence stretched between us until Mom finally spoke. "Your home is lovely, Emma. Very sophisticated. You always did have expensive tastes." The passive-aggressive comment hung in the air. I chose not to respond to the bait. "What brings you to Boston?" I asked directly. "You should have called first. I might not have been home." "We tried calling," Julie said sharply. "You changed your number." I had, in fact, changed my number after the funeral, tired of seeing Mom on my caller ID only to find it was a telemarketer who had spoofed a local number. "Well, you're here now," I said. "What can I do for you?" Mom straightened her back, adopting the formal posture I recognized from childhood discussions about serious matters. "Emma, we're in a difficult position," she began. "After your father's passing, we discovered his financial situation was more complicated than we realized." I waited, saying nothing. "The medical bills were substantial," she continued. "Insurance covered some, but not all. And the house needs significant repairs before it can be sold." Julie jumped in, her voice quivering slightly. "And Brian and I just found out we're having twins. The doctor says it's a high-risk pregnancy. I might have to quit my job earlier than planned." I looked between them, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading but scarcely believing it. "That sounds challenging," I said carefully. "I'm sorry for your difficulties." Mom leaned forward. "Emma, we've seen the articles about your company sale. We know about the money." The bluntness of her statement took me aback. "My financial situation is my private business." "But that's just it," Brian interjected. "Family finances are family business. You owe your family a share of your fortune." I actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. "I owe you? How exactly did you reach that conclusion?" "Your success came from the values we instilled in you," Mom said, her tone increasingly righteous. "The work ethic, the education we provided. Everything you are comes from us." The audacity was breathtaking. I struggled to maintain my composure. The education that I earned scholarships for? The work ethic I learned from Grandma Grace? The business I built while you were telling me it was just a phase? Mom's expression hardened. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded document. "We have proof that you promised to support the family financially if you ever made it big. Your father kept notes from our conversations." She handed me a paper with what appeared to be a transcription of a phone call dated during my college years. The handwriting was indeed my father's, but the content was twisted, taking fragments of an optimistic conversation about the future and framing them as a promise of financial support. Julie began to cry right on cue. "We're going to lose the house, Emma.
The house you grew up in.
How can you be so heartless?" "I don't understand what you're asking for," I said, though I understood perfectly well. "We're asking for what's fair," Brian stated flatly. "A third of your windfall. You're set for life now. The least you can do is make sure your mother and sister are taken care of." I stood up, anger finally breaking through my shock. "Let me get this straight. You disinherit me, don't invite me to my own father's will reading, barely acknowledge me at his funeral, and now you show up at my door demanding money? Do I have that right?" "This isn't about the past," Mom sniffed. "This is about family responsibility. I think you should leave," I said quietly. "Not until we resolve this," Brian insisted. "We're prepared to take legal action if necessary. Your verbal contract with your parents is binding in Connecticut." "Legal action?" I repeated incredulously. "You're threatening to sue me?" "Not threatening," Mom corrected. "We've already consulted an attorney. Either you agree to share what's rightfully ours, or we'll see you in court." I walked to the door and opened it. "Get out of my house.
Now."
They didn't move. "Emma, be reasonable," Julie pleaded. "Think about your nieces or nephews. They're innocent in all this." The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost laughable. Almost. "I'm calling my lawyer," I said, pulling out my phone. "And then I'm calling the police to remove you from my property if you don't leave immediately." Brian stood, pulling Julie up with him. "You'll regret this. Blood is thicker than water." "Apparently not in this family," I replied. As they reluctantly moved toward the door, I dialed Gregory Wilson, my attorney who had helped with the North Star acquisition. He answered on the second ring, and I put him on speaker. "Gregory, my family is here threatening legal action over my company sale. They're claiming I owe them a third of the proceeds based on an alleged verbal contract." Mom, Julie, and Brian froze in the doorway. "Emma, make no statements and do not agree to anything," Gregory advised, his voice clear and authoritative through the speaker. "This type of claim has no legal merit without substantial documentation. I'll meet you tomorrow to discuss, but for now, ask them to leave and communicate only through me going forward." The look on their faces as they heard a professional dismiss their claims so easily was something I will never forget. A mixture of shock, anger, and for the first time, fear. "You heard my lawyer," I said.
"Please leave now.
Any further communication can go through him." They left without another word, but the damage was done. The peace I had found in Europe had been shattered, replaced by a new battle I never wanted to fight. The next morning, I met Gregory at his downtown office. The space was all polished wood and leather, with views of Boston Harbor that typically would have calmed me. Not today. I brought the document my mother had shown me, along with every piece of correspondence I had received from my family over the past 5 years. "This is ridiculous," Gregory said after reviewing everything. "What they're attempting is essentially extortion dressed up as a family obligation. There's no legal basis for their claim of a verbal contract." "Could they actually sue me?" I asked. "Anyone can file a lawsuit," he explained. "The question is whether it would survive initial scrutiny. Based on what you've shown me, I doubt it would. But we should prepare as if it will proceed, just to be safe." 2 days later, we received a formal letter from Thompson and Blackwell, a small law firm in Hartford. The letter outlined their claims in legal language that made my stomach turn. According to them, I had made repeated promises of financial support throughout my adult life, creating a reasonable expectation that I would share my business success with my family. "These people are serious," I said to Gregory during our next meeting. "They're seriously misguided," he replied. "But we need to understand what we're dealing with." I'm going to have an investigator look into your family's financial situation and any history of similar claims. What the investigator uncovered shocked even me. 3 years earlier, my parents had made similar claims against a distant cousin who had won a moderate lottery prize. The case had been settled out of court, but records suggested they had received a 5-figure sum. They've done this before, I said in disbelief. They're professional opportunists. But the revelations didn't stop there. I decided to go through some of Grandma Grace's old papers that I had kept in storage. Among them, I found financial records showing that my parents had borrowed substantial sums from her over the years, with little evidence of repayment. Most disturbing was a letter Grandma Grace had written to her attorney before her death, explaining why she had left her estate to me instead of her daughter. In it, she detailed my father's gambling problem, which had drained family resources for years while my mother covered for him. She expressed concern that any money left to my mother would be mismanaged or lost to my father's addiction. Your grandmother knew, Gregory said gently. That's why she protected her assets by leaving them directly to you. Armed with this information, we prepared for the preliminary hearing. Gregory gathered statements from my business associates, including Diane, confirming that I had built my company through my own efforts, without family support. We collected bank records showing I had never received financial assistance from my parents after high school. And we prepared to present Grandma Grace's documents if necessary. The day of the hearing arrived with a mix of dread and determination. I wore a conservative navy suit and minimal jewelry, wanting to project seriousness rather than the wealthy entrepreneur my family believed I had become. The courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoing hallways. I saw my mother, Julie, and Brian huddled with their attorney near the courtroom entrance. They pointedly looked away when they noticed me. Inside the courtroom, their attorney presented their case first. The claims were even more outlandish than I had expected. According to him, I had promised to take care of the family once my business succeeded. He described elaborate conversations that had never happened, including specific pledges to buy my parents a retirement home and fund Julie's children's education. My mother took the stand, painting a picture of a loving, supportive family who had sacrificed everything for my success. She claimed they had paid for tutors, computers, and business courses that had given me the foundation for my company. It was a work of complete fiction. We just want what Emma promised us, she said, dabbing at non-existent tears. What any loving daughter would want to do for her family. When Julie testified, she described financial hardships that seemed designed to elicit maximum sympathy. The dangerous pregnancy, the mortgage they could barely afford, the dream of giving her children the opportunities she had never had. Throughout their testimony, I maintained a neutral expression, though inside I was seething at the blatant lies. When our turn came, Gregory approached the issue methodically. He presented my academic records showing the scholarships I had earned. He called Diane to testify about my business development, highlighting that I had built everything from a small inheritance from my grandmother, not family support. Then he revealed the financial records showing my parents' history of mismanaging money, the loans from Grandma Grace, and the previous attempt to claim a relative's lottery winnings. Your Honor, Gregory said, his voice steady and clear, this case represents a troubling pattern of behavior. The plaintiffs have a documented history of seeking financial gain from successful relatives. They have misrepresented their relationship with my client and fabricated promises that were never made. This lawsuit is not about family obligation. It is about opportunism, pure and simple. The judge, an older woman with shrewd eyes, had been taking notes throughout. She looked at my mother directly. Mrs. Hayes, these financial records raise serious questions about your credibility. Can you explain why you failed to disclose the previous settlement with your nephew, or the loans from your mother that were never repaid? My mother stammered, clearly unprepared for this line of questioning. Her attorney attempted to object, but the judge overruled him. Additionally, the judge continued, I see no evidence of a verbal contract. Even if such conversations occurred as you described them, which seems doubtful given the contradicting evidence, they would not constitute a legally binding agreement. She turned to me briefly, her expression softening slightly. Ms. Hayes, the court recognizes that family relationships can be complex and painful. However, you have no legal obligation to support adult family members who have chosen to exclude you from inheritance and family proceedings. With that, she dismissed the case, stating that it lacked legal merit and appeared to be brought in bad faith. Gregory squeezed my shoulder as we gathered our papers. "It's over," he said quietly. "They can't touch you now." But as I looked across the courtroom at the fury on my mother's face and the defeated slump of Julie's shoulders, I knew that while the legal battle might be over, the emotional wounds were far from healed. In the courthouse hallway, my mother caught up to me as I was thanking Gregory for his help. She pulled me aside, her face flushed with anger and something else I couldn't quite identify. "You humiliated us in there," she hissed, keeping her voice low. "Was that necessary? Bringing up all that ancient history?" I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time as one adult seeing another rather than a child seeking approval. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the exposure of her schemes. "Why did you really disinherit me, Mom?" I asked quietly. Was it ever really about Julie needing more help, or was it punishment for not needing you? Her expression shifted, the anger giving way to something raw and honest. "You were always so independent, even as a little girl. You never needed me like Julie did. Do you know how that feels? To have a child who can take or leave you. And that justified decades of favoritism? Of making me feel like I was never good enough?" "You were already good enough," she said bitterly. "That was the problem. You didn't need us to succeed. You made us irrelevant." In that moment, I understood something fundamental about my mother that had eluded me my entire life. Her love was conditional, based on need and dependence. Julie's clinginess and constant crises made her feel important, necessary. My self-reliance threatened her identity as a mother. "I would have included you in my life if you had ever shown genuine interest in who I am, not what I could give you," I told her. She had no response to that. As she turned to leave, Julie approached, her eyes red from crying. Brian had stormed out immediately after the ruling. "You got what you wanted," Julie said, her voice breaking. "You proved you're better than all of us. Happy now." I sighed. This was never about being better than you, Julie. This was about defending myself against people who tried to take advantage of me after years of rejection. She looked down, avoiding my gaze. "They told me you promised," she whispered. "They said you owed us, that you had abandoned the family for your career and needed to make amends. And you believed them without ever asking me?" "I needed to believe them," she admitted. "The twins, the mortgage. I'm drowning, Emma. And you seem to have everything figured out." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of compassion for my sister. She had been manipulated just as I had been, albeit in different ways. "I can't give you a third of my money," I said firmly. "But I could set up college funds for the twins. With legal documentation and clear boundaries." Her head snapped up, surprise evident in her expression. "Why would you do that after all this?" "Because they're innocent in all this. And because breaking the cycle starts with someone making a different choice." In the weeks that followed, I worked with Gregory to establish trust funds for my future nieces or nephews, structured in a way that the money could only be used for educational expenses. I made it clear to Julie that this was not an open door to further financial requests, but a one-time gesture for children who deserved a chance. The emotional aftermath of the court case was harder to navigate. I began seeing Dr. Rebecca Winters, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our weekly sessions helped me process the complicated grief of losing my family not once but twice, first through their rejection and then through their betrayal. "You're mourning the family you deserved but never had," Dr. Winters explained during one particularly difficult session. "That's a unique kind of grief because there's no closure, no funeral for lost possibilities." Gradually, I built a life filled with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. Alyssa remained my rock. I reconnected with Nathan when his job brought him back to Boston. I cultivated friendships with people who understood boundaries and reciprocity, concepts my family had never grasped. I also channeled my experience into helping others. I established the Grace Henderson Foundation for Young Entrepreneurs, providing seed money and mentorship to young women from challenging backgrounds who wanted to start businesses. Our first recipient was a 22-year-old single mother who had developed an innovative childcare scheduling app. Working with these determined young women healed something in me. I saw in them the resilience I had developed, the drive that had carried me through difficult times. And I took pride in being the supporter I had wished for during my own journey. A year after the court case, Julie reached out via email, asking if we could meet. We arranged to have coffee at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between Boston and Hartford. I arrived with clear boundaries and tempered expectations. Julie was already there, looking more settled than the last time I had seen her. The twins, a boy and girl, were now 4 months old and thriving, according to the photos she showed me. Our conversation was cautious, but civil. She had started therapy herself, she told me, and was beginning to understand the dysfunctional patterns in our family. Mom isn't speaking to me much these days, she admitted, since I refused to appeal the court decision and accepted your trust fund offer. Are you okay financially? I asked, careful not to open a door to requests. We're managing. Brian got a promotion, and I'm working part-time from home. It's not luxury, but it's stable. We didn't become best friends that day, or even particularly close. But we established a fragile beginning, an acknowledgement that while we couldn't change the past, we might be able to create a different kind of future relationship, one based on honesty and respect rather than competition and resentment. As for my mother, our relationship remained distant. She sent a formal thank you note for the trust funds, but made no attempts at reconciliation. I had accepted that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, and perhaps shouldn't be. That Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my home for what I had come to call my chosen family. Alyssa and her husband, Nathan and his new boyfriend, several colleagues who had become friends, and 2 young entrepreneurs from my foundation. The house was filled with laughter, honest conversation, and the warm glow of connections built on mutual respect. After everyone had gone home, I found an envelope that had been delivered with the day's mail. Inside was a short note from Julie. Emma, I'm learning that family isn't just blood. It's behavior. Thank you for showing me what that can look like. Happy Thanksgiving. Julie. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. A small step toward healing. That night, I stood in my garden, looking up at the stars that Grandma Grace had taught me to identify as a child. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain that had nearly broken me, and the strength I had found in rebuilding myself. I realized that the true freedom came not from winning the legal battle or even from financial success, but from finally releasing the desperate need for approval from people incapable of giving it. My worth had never been dependent on their validation. It had always been within me, waiting to be recognized. If you've ever had to create boundaries with toxic family members or felt forced to choose between your well-being and family expectations, I hope my story reminds you that you're not alone. Sometimes the family we build is healthier than the one we're born into. Have you ever had to make difficult choices to protect your peace? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and self-discovery. Remember, you deserve respect and love without conditions. Thank you for listening to my story.